Hi, and welcome to History Makers. I'm Matt Prater. Today we're chatting with Sarah Keel, who's the Executive Director of Renew Clinic in Knoxville in the USA. And we're here in the studios at The Light FM, which is part of the Billy Graham Training Centre at the Cove in Asheville, North Carolina. It's a blessing to be here today. Welcome along, Sarah. Tell us a bit of your story. Whereabouts were you born and raised?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I was born in Johnson City, Tennessee, but when I was about 3 months old, we moved to Winston-Salem. So I call Winston-Salem, North Carolina, my home. Mm-hmm. So Winston-Salem is about 2 hours from here in Asheville. But I grew up, my mom was a single mom. She left my biological father when I was 3 months old, because he was an addict, he was abusive, and so that's how that story goes.
Okay.
So I've never met him, but she moved to Winston-Salem, closer to her family, where, I was raised in that part of the USA until I was about 20 years old.
Okay. And tell us a bit about your upbringing. Did you have any religious upbringing at all?
So, no. Well, I would say yes, but not a Christian upbringing. So the idea about Christianity, we were never hostile to the idea of Christianity or Jesus. There was always something special to Jesus because there were family members that we had that were believers. And so I would, hear the prayers of them, and they would, hear their conversations, go to church on Easter, sometimes on Christmas. But by the time I was 8 years old, my mom, she had met someone who ended up adopting me. They got married. He's Jewish. He grew up in the Bronx, so he's a very strict man. But I'm still grateful to this day that he actually, decided to take me in as his own. But we kind of we had a Universalist, Unitarian kind of perspective on things. There's many different pathways to the top of the mountain kind of thing. I remember going to a Universalist Unitarian church, going on nature walks. We had Buddha by the front door. We had Hindu god statues up in the front yard. We had, I remember he was very into kind of a lot of Eastern mysticism, so and tarot readings and things like that. That was always something that was just a fascination in my home. Not in a big way, but it was there. It was kind of in the background. Needless to say, no, I did not grow up Christian.
And tell us a bit about your years after high school. What did you do after school? What was life like for you then?
Well, it's hard to say how life was after high school without talking a little bit about high school, because when I was in high school, I actually started using drugs and alcohol when I was 12 years old.
12.
Yeah. And it was, binge drinking, trying marijuana, cocaine by 14, ecstasy, those things. And so my mom and my adopted father ended up getting a divorce, and she ended up remarrying someone who was very, I would say, religious, could quote the Bible up and down. I don't know if he was necessarily a believer, and I have reasons for that, but needless to say, it introduced me to, it introduced our home to the idea of Christianity. And so, I was always very fascinated with it. Never felt hostile in my heart towards it. Never hated Christians or thought they were stupid, nothing like that. But I was in and out of jail during that time. I was on probation, I think, my entire adolescence. And it wasn't until I was incarcerated that this group of people who had a prison ministry came and ministered to me, and I surrendered to the Lord when I was in jail. So, after high school, I didn't even graduate high school. Actually, I got my GED. Whenever I left the house, it was to join something called AmeriCorps, which is where I ended up meeting my husband. But I feel like I'm jumping a little far ahead right now. Yeah. But to explain the transition, there's just so much there. So,
Well, you must have been going through a terrible time, when you had all those addictions and you were going through, the horrible scene you were in. Was there ever moments where you you thought God was speaking to you or guiding you in that time, or wasn't it? It wasn't until you were in prison.
yeah, so I remember being very young and being in the back of the car. I just remember like looking up at the stars and knowing intuitively that there was a loving God that saw me, that and I felt safe. And it wasn't that I was looking to the stars. I was looking beyond the stars of the creator of the stars. And I remember being very young thinking that way. And so I believe that God's been drawing me to himself my whole life. And I can see that. I just didn't really know who he was, I guess you could say. I remember, one day I had a all-nighter, had many all-nighters, and drinking all night, using drugs, didn't remember anything the night before, waking up in a place I wasn't familiar with. And I remember too, like whenever I would always wake up really early, even if I had been up all night, I'd always wake up really early and like ready to go. Like I either want to go home or I want to leave where I was at. I was ready to get out of wherever I was at. And one of my friends, they were taking me home, and I remember like leaning my head up against the back window. Something about being in the back seat of a car, looking up at the sky, drew me to God. But I remember saying to him, God, please help me. Like, it's almost as if I didn't know any other way to be. God, please help me. And I got dropped off at my house. I went inside. I used the bathroom, and I heard a ring, the doorbell ring. And, I mean, this was within 3 minutes of being at my house. A police officer was there to take me to jail because he had a warrant for my arrest for something. I've had so many charges, I don't remember what this one was. Maybe a violation of probation. And he was very kind. He wasn't, demeaning or demanding. He even allowed me to sit in the back of the police car without handcuffs. But he took me to jail, and that is where I think the Lord really sat me down quietly. And I even perceived it then, that it was, I didn't take that as, really, God, I'm going to pray and I'm going to get arrested. It never landed that way in me. Like somehow by God's grace, intuitively, I realized that sometimes when God answers our prayers, that's what it looks like to save us from ourselves. So I would say that would be a good example of a time.
Well, let's get back to your conversion experience in prison. Tell us how life changed after that.
Sure. Like I said, I've been drawn to God my whole life. I just didn't have knowledge. And so whenever these women came into the jail, I had already been in an environment where, the end times were talked about a lot in my home because, again, my mom had remarried a man who knew scriptures up and down. He was always talking about it. I was very interested in the things of the Bible because, I don't know, there's something about it that just fascinated me. The book of Revelation was fascinating to me. It really drew me in. There was almost something exciting to me in that. And that may sound strange to some people because I know some people are terrified, but there's something that really drew me in that I was really fascinated by. So I was already really interested. And so my heart was fertile for mercy. I had burned every bridge. I had stolen from people. I had betrayed people. I really had no friends left because I had really hurt them all. No one trusted me. I had no money. I had no prospects. Owned nothing. I mean, just really felt like just a loser, for lack of a better term, and just really bogged down with guilt. And so the soil of my heart was fertile for these women to come in, and they told, there was a group of us sitting in this area, in this like room that they took us all to have Bible study, and they told us about the woman with the bleeding disorder that went to touch the hem of Jesus's garment to be healed, and she was healed instantly. And so they had this garment there for all, and invited all of us to come and touch the hem of, symbolically, the hem of Jesus's garment. I couldn't wait to get to that, to touch it, and to touch the hem of his garment. And I just started weeping.
Wow.
And that was the moment where I truly was touched by the love and grace of God. And I believed it.
Yeah.
I didn't know theology at that point. I didn't know, I didn't have a great, theology or understand things. There's still a lot there. But the one thing I did know is that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus can help me, and that he loves me.
Yeah.
That's about all I knew. And so in jail, it drastically changed me. They actually taught us to cover our heads in prayer. Which that's what I did, when I was in jail. So my thing is I'd go up to my cell, I'd put a blanket over my head, and I'd talk to Jesus.
Wow.
And so that's what I did. And it felt like a private space, to just commune with the Lord. It wasn't, looking back on it, sometimes I'll still cover my head in prayer. But I was just really drawn to him and his word, and I immediately became an evangelist.
Wow.
I remember going down to the common area and sitting down, and I remember I was reading in Matthew, and I came down, and there was this table that I sat at, and a lot of them were in, same-sex couples, and they were gossiping about people in there and talking badly about other people, and there's just a lot of things that I had read, just finished reading. And I remember going down and telling them, hey, you need to repent. And I told them exactly what they were doing. And I remember them just sitting there they didn't rebuke me. They just listened. They didn't get angry. They just got very quiet and listened. And so I believe that that's something that the Lord just kind of deposited in me very, very early on, is go tell what you read.
Wow. So good. Now, our time's almost up, but I'd love to know a bit about Renew Knoxville. What do you guys do?
Sure. I didn't realize we're almost out of time. So, Renew Knoxville, we're a Christ-centered addiction treatment facility. So, I've worked in the secular industry for a very long time. You cannot specifically say Jesus. They will be fine with higher power, even the term God, But to actually define God, you'll be met with hostility and resistance. And that always was really hard for me, because it is Christ, and there's no doubt in my mind that it was only Christ that set me free from a girl who, by the age of 18, I was shooting heroin. And so now I've been given an opportunity to freely talk about Christ. I'm the director. We came to be because our mayor, who is Mayor Glenn Jacobs, he's Kane, the WWE wrestler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
He's a celebrity, but
cool.
he's our mayor.
Okay. Right.
I was working for the state at the time, and he introduced me to a group of like-minded pastors. Essentially, if they agree on the Apostles' Creed, they kind of linked arms as brothers, crossing denominational lines, and said, we need to do something for our community, because this is an epidemic. I mean, people are dying. And so I worked with them for about a year and a half, and then they approached me about being the director. And so here I am today.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, it's a great example of, you're using your scars now for stars.
Right.
Your message become your message. Well, it's been awesome to hear a little bit of your story today. If people want to find out more, they can check out the website renewnknoxville.com.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
And on social media, they can search up Sarah Keel as well, find out all the info.
Sarah Nicole Keel. I have my middle name in there.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And, it's awesome to hear how God is using you now to reach out to others.
Yeah.
And, if people want to book you to speak, do you speak and preach at events too?
Yeah, I do. I do. Yeah. Whenever people ask me, I don't really advertise hey, I speak, but people will just naturally just come and ask me to come and speak. And so.
Well, the thing is, you can't argue with someone's testimony.